OCC Pandemic is a cooperative board game where players take the roles of campus leaders during a global pandemic. Your goal is to keep the campus open for in-person learning. Let's set it up. These are your infection cubes. You'll set up 3 of these for every player in the game. So 15 for a 5-player game, 12, 9, and 6 for a 4, 3, or 2-player game. The disinfect cubes are the small white cubes. There'll be 10 of these in the disinfect supply for a 5-player game, 8, 7, or 6 for a 4, 3, or 2-player game. Same quantities of social distance cubes, the purple ones that go in the purple supply, 10, 8, 7, and 6, depending on the number of players. You'll set your morale at 10 to begin and the weak tracker at 1. Each of the colored cubes represents a group of students or staff. The yellow are female students, the blue are male students, the red are staff. Place 12 of the yellow and the blue cubes in their respective residence halls, 2 in each space, 4 in each building. Place 2 of the red staff cubes in PPD. Place the other red cubes, 2 in each building, 1 in each space. Take the remaining blue and yellow cubes and place 1 in each building, 1 in each space. You'll have 5 cubes left over of each color. Set them aside, they'll be used later. So at the end of the setup, you'll have 2 cubes in every space of every building. Next, you'll roll for your initial infection. So using the die, you'll roll the coordinates. And say, for example, I roll a red 3 and a black 6. I'll place an infection cube in this location. These cubes are infected, so they will go into week 1 of the infected quarantine. And the cubes that are in adjacent spaces are exposed. So I'll remove those and place those in the exposed quarantine, week 1, that corresponds to their color. I'll do that 2 more times and add some cubes here to our quarantine as we place them. So you can do this a 4th time if you'd like for greater difficulty. I find 3 is about right for starting out. Next, you'll select your players. You can play with up to 5 players. You can play solo and have 1 person playing up to 5 characters. You can play with 2 people playing with 4 characters. It's up to you. There are 5 characters in the base game. The important thing is that you place them in their home office location. So the building that matches their color is considered their office. And that's important because every time they leave campus and come back, they'll always return to their home office. That can be helpful in moving them around. After you've done that, you will reveal the crisis. Every round has its own crisis, its own challenge to meet, and you'll place that upright and then select the first player. It's the player who has been to the doctor the most recently, and the game will then begin. The player turn consists of 3 phases. There are actions, event, and infection. There are 6 actions that you may take. The move action is to move 1 space in any direction, including diagonal, for 1 action. You can also move off campus into the visiting areas of the hospital and the quarantine. You can also move between quarantines and hospitals for 1 action, and then you can move back to campus for 1 action, moving back to your home office space. In a pinch, you can move for 3 actions to any building on campus. Next, you can choose to decontaminate, that is to remove an infection cube. And to do that, you have to be in the same space as that cube. And so you'd use a move action and then a decontaminate action to remove the cube. You can never end your turn on a space with an infection cube, nor can you pass through one as you move. Next, you could disinfect a space. And so in any space that you occupy, you can place a disinfect cube, keeping that area safe. Or you can, from a distance, you can command social distance with a purple cube and decrease the morale for 1 every time you do that. Also, it's important to know that you can never place more than 4 large cubes in any space at any time. And so when you have a social distance cube, you can have no more than 3 large cubes in that space. If for some reason you'd need to place a 4th cube in that space because of an event card, you would have to remove the social distance cube first, return it to the supply, and then add the additional cubes. You may also want to perform the heal action, and that requires moving to one of the visiting areas of the quarantine or the hospital. And while there, you'll move a cube one space to the right. This represents the passage of time and moving that cube forward in the process. Once you move a cube to the release column here, you roll immediately for release of that cube back to the campus. Now, if you roll a 1, unfortunately, things get worse and the cube moves down to the next level of acuity. If you roll a 2, the cube moves back to the week from which they came. If you roll a 3 or through a 6, the cube will return to campus. Students always return to residence halls. Staff always return to non-residence hall buildings. Finally, you can use the action to increase the morale. You spend 2 actions to increase the morale by 1. And that's the action phase of the player turn. The next phase is the event phase. You'll draw an event card. There are 4 types of event cards. The most common one is a single event card. You simply perform the action and discard. Another type is the continued effect card. For these cards, you'll take a continued effect token that matches the color of the player, place it on that card. That reminds us that this card is in effect until the current player's next turn has been completed. So every player will experience the effect of this card. A third type of card is a play anytime card that you can keep and play anytime on any player's turn during their action phase. The fourth card is a conditional effect card that is in play until the effect has been satisfied. Once the event phase has been completed, you'll move to the infection phase, and you'll roll the dice again for infection. Say, for example, I roll 5, 10, and instead of placing a cube here, the disinfect cube cancels the infection effect. I return the disinfect cube to the supply, and I don't place an infection cube whatsoever. Infection phase ends at that point. Say I placed one likewise at 5:11. There's a social distance cube there. I would simply remove the social distance cube and return the black cube to the supply. Infection phase ends at that point. However, if I were to roll and place a cube on a space that already has an infection cube, then we have an outbreak. So in this case, say I roll a 3, 6, rather than placing a second cube there, I will place an infection cube in each of the adjacent spaces, causing a domino effect. This player is infected, this cube is infected, and they'll move to the quarantine. Notice whenever a player moves to infected quarantine, there's a loss of 1 morale immediately. And then I will look to see if adjacent cubes are affected, and sure enough, these are exposed, this player and these cubes are all exposed. So as you can see, an outbreak is a really bad thing that we don't want to happen. And what you'll notice here is as I've moved the cubes here, I've exceeded my quarantine capacity, so I've got to move 3 cubes down into my infected quarantine. Well, now I've exceeded capacity there because I can only have 5 down there, so I move 1 down into the hospital. So we want to avoid outbreaks by managing the number of viral cubes on the campus. That's the infection phase. Now, once you've completed that phase, you move on to the next player, and they continue those 3 phases: action, event, infection. Once every player has had their turn, then we move to the end of round actions. First thing you do is to advance the week marker by 1. Notice that on even-numbered weeks, we're going to add additional students to the campus. This represents the work of our admissions department that is continually recruiting, even during a pandemic. And so we'll add 1 cube of each color to a residence hall space. We'll increase morale by 1 because we're very happy to have new students at all times. We then move all the cubes in our quarantine 1 week to the right, representing the passage of time. And if any of these would have already been in week 2 and moved to release, we'd go ahead and roll for release at that point as well. And once we've done that and we've rolled for release from the hospital, then we check to see if we have satisfied the conditions of the crisis. If we have, we gain 2 morale. If we haven't, at this point in the game, then we lose 2 morale, and we reveal the crisis for the next round, and we pass the first player token to the player on our left, and we repeat. And so you repeat this for 6 weeks, and if you make it through the end of the 6th week, congratulations. You have kept the campus open for in-person learning, and you have won the game. However, there are 4 conditions under which you can lose the game immediately. The first is if you run out of infection cubes. If the supply is empty and you need to place one because of an infection roll or an event card, and you can't do so, it's game over. The virus has overridden the campus. Second, if your morale ever reaches 0, the game is over immediately at that point. Third, if your hospital capacity is exceeded, it's game over. And finally, if someone doesn't leave the hospital after the 3rd week, it's also game over. Now, once you have mastered the base game, you may want to introduce some other players. There are 4 expansion players. Each player has their own unique abilities, so experiment with that, have some fun, and add some variety to the game by using those players. You can also add a greater level of difficulty by adding hot zones to the game. These are overlays of every single building on campus. And when you put these out at the beginning of the game, what happens when you roll for infection, when the coordinate is on one of these building spaces, you roll again immediately, increasing the level of infection. So if you place 5 of these, we consider that a sophomore level, 10 is junior, and 15 is a senior level. So that will add some difficulty to it. We also have immunity tokens. One of the things that happens when a player is infected and makes it through the infected quarantine and back to campus, not only is there an increase of 1 morale, but you also get a immunity token. This means that you are forever immune from the effects of infection and exposure for the rest of the game. You can also get these through certain event cards as well. Well, that's the game in a nutshell. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to contact me at stafford.matt@occ.edu. I hope you have fun playing the game and making memories together playing OCC Pandemic.